Hi, folks. Welcome to this week's Marketing Ops AMA. We're back again. And this week, I wanted to talk about a topic, Brandon, that you and I have been discussing with one of our clients about attribution, where they basically came to us and they're like, hey, we want to do attribution. What should we do next? And I feel like what they really expected us to be like was tell them to what tool to buy. But Brandon, you want to tell me like the conversation that we actually had with them about what their first step in trying to do attribution was?
Yeah, and let me make sure I get my notes up here because this is not the simplest topic in the world to talk about. So I guess just as a primer, attribution has two sort of levels of complexity. There's like focusing on one action or event that has happened. So this is single point attribution. Then there's taking the complexity to the next level and saying, okay, let's look at more than one point in the process. And I want to stop here because I think a lot of people do not spend enough time defining the process, like
Mhm.
these points in time. Like, what do they mean? What does lead create mean? What does opportunity create mean? Like, because that can be so contentious, like internally, and even before the contention, it may not be widely adopted or understood either. So it's really important that like you're on the same page before you have this attribution conversation, because if you don't, like, it's not gonna end well, in
Oh
my
yeah.
opinion, at least.
No, and I think you and I have definitely seen like we've had ringside seat to some of those like political fights about the
Mhm.
attribution pieces of
Yeah.
who gets credit, who doesn't, and before you even spend a single dollar, I think you're very right that it's worth deciding what how are we going to assign credit and who's going to get it and how, and make sure everybody agrees to like the rules of the game. um so Brandon, I'm also like not an attribution person, don't ask me those questions. But what are some of the like common models that people are usually going to look at?
Yeah, so I would say for first and foremost, I would say for any business of a sufficient enough size where like you're not doing everything by yourself, I would say at that point, I think attribution can tell you some useful things about your customers. Um, starting off in those more simple models, there's first and last touch, right? And what those are doing is those are focusing on two distinct points in time. The time that you discovered this person, this sort of engagement, where it came from, literally the first thing that
Mhm.
that was tracked, because there's some things that you can't really track. Like this conversation that we're having, it's not getting in your CRM,
No, it's not.
right? Like, I just want to make sure everybody, there's a limit. And then there's last touch, where it's like the very last thing that happened before a successful outcome, like someone becoming a customer. Again, people can become customers multiple times. We're just talking about one distinct cycle, not like every cycle after that. And those are useful. I mean, I think in the context of, depending on how big the company is, it can be pretty useful early on. Don't get me wrong; they greatly oversimplify the buying journey, like extreme oversimplifications, but they're good at like directionally telling you, hey, what's good at bringing things in the door, or what's good at like that final push. you know
Yes.
I think it's good to really master understanding what the data is telling you, but also mastering that there is a limit to what these systems can track. And it's also pretty good to ask, like, hey, by the way, how did you learn about us? Like that,
Yes.
how did you learn about us question, I don't think is a per se an attribution touch point per se. I think
Mhm.
it's like a uh, because we're subject to recency bias. Like we're gonna remember the thing, like the most recent thing. Like
Yes.
people need to change that to the most impactful because are
Mhm.
people going to really remember the very first billboard they saw or the very first ad? Or no, I don't.
No,
You know, you're
100%.
busy. You know, you're not going to remember the very first thing, but you'll remember the most impactful channels.
Yeah.
So I would say use the information together to make decisions,
Yeah.
attribution research.
And
That's
I
what.
think one thing, going back to one of our earlier conversations, is that I think first touch and last touch can be done easily in your existing automation platforms. Like you can use the data you already have to get there. Whereas I think some of the more complex stuff you're about to talk about, you almost certainly need a third party tool. So that's also why I think the first touch and last touch is a really good option for earlier stage companies that like you've got your HubSpot, you've got your Marketo, you got your Salesforce, your other CRM. You kind of mostly have what you need already in there. And it's just a matter of like swishing the data around to get you that answer. Um okay, cool. So then what's the complicated stuff?
So then there's you make an assumption that there are more things in the journey than just the beginning and the end. Now, anyone who appreciates the math of this, there's in it's not infinite, but there's so many things that influence us to make a buying decision. You can't possibly track it all, but like these are the things that these systems can track, right? And they get plotted along a line, and we start to assign these positions, if you will, that influence the names of the model. So, like linear, for example, says, well, hey, of all of the, and I think this is a good point for us to stop and like differentiate. There are channels or sort of there are offers, things
Mhm.
that we consume. That's how I define it. Like um, a newsletter, an event, uh, content. Like you consume these things regardless of how you've learned about it. You're sort of consuming it, and then there's like, okay, well, how did you get to the offer? Like Alysha told me about this great newsletter. Boom, right? Or I was searching online and I found this great article. Boom, right? Like I like to think of those two things as different. I think you have to be careful when we're talking about attribution because these systems assume you have a very clear idea of how you differentiate between those, and you can step into some landmines if you're not clear about that, especially the tools that depend heavily on the Salesforce architecture and like campaign members and whatnot. So there needs to be some work to make sure that the that data model is you can
Yeah.
use it. Example, very tangible example. If you create campaign members for LinkedIn article, you might have an issue because because is it LinkedIn that drove it? Is the article that drove like that is where
Yeah.
that is what you're setting yourself up for potentially. Now, if you don't care about that or your model is sophisticated enough or your organization is sophisticated enough to where you want to add that plane, if you will, of like complication, so be it, right? But I would say, you can simplify a lot of this down by making sure that you have a pretty clear distinction between those two.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's linears that, all right, well, all of the touch points in the journey, we can track them and they're all equal. I personally think that that model is extremely impactful from the sense of like, okay, the data is there and you can take it and make it your own, right? Like it's not telling you anything besides what has happened and that everything was equal. So there's no assumptions. It's not biased to tell a certain story or not. It's just telling you the story. So, I love that. Um, then you start to get into adding weight, if you will, to the different points in time. So U-shapes, for example, will look at, okay, well, what is the very first thing that happened? And then What was the thing that happened that caused this interaction for you to know the person behind the interaction, right? And then the touch points that are in between those, it'll take it and weight it less than those two. It'll weight those the most, 40%
Mhm.
for both. And then the other 20, everything that happened in between those, it'll spread that 20% out evenly, right? That's really complicated,
Yes.
right? Because are those interactions between the first and most recent one, are they equal? If you start to get in this conversation about weighting, like it's arbitrary. In my opinion, it's a little arbitrary. Like, is this really equal to that or da 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 da? That's I just be careful going
Yeah.
down that path, right? What are your thoughts about this
So,
whole
shock. This is embarrassing. Shockingly, I've been in marketing ops for 8 years. I think this is the first time somebody has explained U shape to me, and now the W shape clicked in my head in a way that actually made sense. Now,
well, I have to I have to thank those that helped me get there.
that
Shout out
helped
to
me
the
get there.
distributor. I love
Yes,
that those guys are
like
yeah.
the crew over at Attributa, Drew and company, they're honestly really fantastic.
Yep. Yep.
So knowing that even the likes of me struggle with this, I think the last question for you there is, so obviously we're consultants. We think people need help. Why do you think people really need help with attribution stuff in specific? And I mean, I think it's because if even the likes of me struggle with it, I don't think the regular folks out there stand a chance necessarily. But what else, Brandon, do you think having like a consultant or a third party come in to help you set up your model is a really good idea?
Well, I mean, for starters, a good consultant's gonna help you navigate the business conversation around
Mm,
attribution. Like if you walk into it without setting the context for the stakeholders and like understanding that uh in this game of credit, everyone has a bias. Like if your organization isn't really thinking about credit but thinking about like, okay, well, what are all of the things that matter regardless of like where it came from, just so that we're more informed, you're probably going to get a little bit of a better outcome and adoption than, hey, um we're trying to tell the marketing story and make that look as good as possible, right? Like although again, I mean, a lot of these tools are marketing attribution. I get that. I think it's important to know, hey, what's the full story,
yeah.
right? Then I mean, there's a lot of setup and there's a lot of like assumptions that these tools make that when you buy them, it's not really shared with you,
Yes.
right? Like there's an assumption of data integrity when you're buying an attribution platform that I think a good consultant will help you wade through those waters a little bit and like
Mhm.
understand, okay, well, we need to have a UTM framework that's really clear and
Mhm.
route traffic in a way that it's easy to digest. We do
Yes.
need to have a we need to have an agreed upon and simple framework for how we think about campaigns. Do we think about them the same? Does the entire go-to-market organization think about those things in the same way? And like to take that a step further, what are the different uh, um, go-to-market teams that would be represented there? Like, do you create campaigns for customer success and for partner and for
Yeah.
sale? Right, like this can get really complicated really quickly, and I think a good consultant will help you understand that there are different steps along the maturity curve of attribution, and
Yes.
you should start, get the information that is readily accessible and sort of grow over time versus trying to boil the ocean and then not really making a lot of progress.
Okay, cool. I think that's a really great place for us to wrap up here. Folks, if you have more attribution questions, you can hit us up. You can hit up the crew at Attributa. Drew is honestly fantastic. We've both had many conversations with him.
Yeah.
And as always, send us your questions and maybe we'll feature them on a next episode. All right, see you around.
See ya.